morning, Central Texas. Welcome to Kids Community Connections at My Kids 1031. I'm Phyllis Jones, your host for this morning. And as you know, I am loving the weather. I don't care what nobody says. I love it because now I can wear all these sweaters and boots that I bought that I'm supposed to be wearing even though I'm in Texas. This morning, we got a real good guest. And people have been talking about for a while. They never hear from him. So I decided, let's change that and let's hear from him. But first, you have to listen to my soapbox complaint. And yes, it affects everybody or some people most of the time. But yesterday, I was at a convenience store on my way to work. And I went in there, to buy something. But the manager of the convenience store is an African-American male. And a Hispanic male had bought a bunch of stuff from there because he was on his way to work. But when the man told him how much it is, he threw it on the counter. So I looked at the manager's face, and he didn't have a good look on his face. So I wanted to see what was going to happen. Well, the manager told the man, he said, listen, I'm a man just like you. I'm a person like you. He said, and you don't have to throw money at me. He said, I consider that insult, you throwing money. He said, so I need you to pick it up and hand it to me. Well, that didn't work for a whole couple of minutes. And then the man he said, but if you don't pick it up and hand it to me, then I need you to put my stuff down and you to walk out of my store, which was very good because I'll admit it, I thought there was going to be an argument in there. I really did. But the man, he's still there too, and he was standing his ground, and eventually he picked up the money and placed it in a man's hand. And the manager said, thank you very much. He said, for being a man and doing what you did. But the Hispanic guy said some mean words to him and walked out the door. So I went up to the manager and congratulated him because he could have handled that all wrong. He had the power to change it, to make it good or bad. And I can't even talk. He went to teaching mode rather than, yelling at him and cussing at him. He kept his cool, so I respected that. But I want to tell everybody, it doesn't take a lot to be nice to somebody. It doesn't take a lot to respect someone. A few little things of kindness. None of that had to happen at all. He could have put the money in the man's hand, walked out the store, have a good day, and went on about his way instead of trying to change it and insert some kind of power that he actually did not have. So what I want to say to everybody is, you know what? When you go somewhere to a store, your attitude you got, keep it. Whoever you're mad at, it's not that person. So all you need to do is respectfully pay for what you're going to get. Don't throw the money on the counter because, with me, probably would have been an incident. I'd have been calling everybody's lawyer. It would have been an incident because I'd been really offended and that would just be blown over, But kindness is easy. It takes a lot more to be upset. So kindness is easier. It eases your day and it doesn't cost anything. And it's something that we can all do. So we need to just at least practice that. That'd be cool. All right. That's my soapbox. I know it's kind of short. Y'all thought I was going to have a whole bunch to say, but nah, I'm going to be good. Okay, as we know, the election is coming up 2018, and if we've been paying attention, we know that we have the chance to change a whole lot that we complain about now if we would do one thing, it's called vote. But we need to know more about voting. We need to know what gerrymandering is. I put it on Facebook, and people were still confused. I'm like, okay. And then we talked about the poll locations changing abruptly in different places. So I think that people need to hear things more than one time from more than one person before they finally get it. So most of you know that I am the state education chair for the NAACP. If you didn't, you know now I am. And our state president, Mr. Gary Bledsoe, he's very knowledgeable about this more than us because we listen and we're studying up under him. And who's ever he's studying up under, we are. But I asked him to come on the show to talk about what's the importance of us voting and why this election year is so important to us, and about the gerrymandering, all that stuff he's going to talk about. So good morning, Gary. How you doing?
Good morning, folks. How are you? Hope you're doing real well.
Yes.
Sounds like you are. Sounds like you're enjoying the cold weather.
Yes, I am.
I'm disappointed in that.
Well, I'm the one of your committee people that go left when everybody goes right.
That does happen sometimes. that does happen sometimes. That does happen, but you're the furthest in the north in terms of your birth, and I think that's carried through. And the rest of us prefer the warm weather.
But y'all adjust because it's going to be the way for a couple of more years now.
The global warming.
Yeah, there you go. See, we told y'all when we were in Alaska it was going to happen. Y'all didn't believe us. But it's okay. Because my polar bears are melting up there. So anyway, 2018 is an important year to vote. And why is this so important?
Well, it's extremely important, maybe more than most. I think that you usually hear people say that. This time, I think it's extremely real. And that is because the Trump administration has come out to be such an anti-minority administration. And with judicial appointments to head federal agencies, all the powers that President Trump has, he is making George Bush seem like a liberal. So we have to contain that. And right now, the congressional leadership has shown that they're not going to stop him at any instance, and that whatever he desires will go through. The only blips have been in reference to the health care, because there are some Republicans that come from states that Obamacare is really providing great assistance to their citizens, so they've been unwilling to give their votes. But you look at the other things that are there, and especially federal judges with lifetime appointments, it's a tremendous threat to us. You look at what he's done with the federal agencies. So the only way to stop that is to change the dynamics in the United States Senate so he doesn't have 50 votes, so that he can just always get President Pence to break a tie, and maybe even change things in the House where Paul Ryan has seemed to go beyond the principles that he seems to espouse sometimes verbally, but he doesn't really follow through on. For whatever reason, people like Paul Ryan have kind of flipped and seem to be under the thumb of the president. And so the types of policies that they'll come through with, and I don't think people really understand, this is a revolution. The thing that President Trump has done is he's taken a look at the whole federal government and the landscape of the structure, and just saying that I disagree with everything that's been done. So he found the person who was most opposed to the mission of that agency, and he's put them in charge of it. So, for example, you look at the State Department. Killeen should be very concerned about that. This is where they're gutting the State Department, and so and you look at the issues in reference to his connections with Russia, and you have to be concerned. What's the consequence to our nation if you cut the State Department staff by a third or a half in the sensitive positions? As we know, that much of our intelligence that we have that allows us to do things and know things comes from the State Department. And the fact that you undermine the alliance and you don't have the State Department doing the types of things that it needs to shore up things with our primary allies, that's a problem. Right now, we've got two folks that are supporting what's being done by the administration, and that's Israel and Russia, and that should be problematic. So, and it goes with you pick out the agency, and we can have the same conversation, because the same thing is going on, whether it's the Consumer Protection, Finance Protection Bureau, whether it's the Office of Civil Rights, whether it's the Attorney General's office, whatever it might be, the anti-person has been put in place, and the only way to stop that is to take away that majority to operate that's in Congress.
That's true. That's true. So also, can you explain? Okay, because when I talk to people about, I explained gerrymandering correctly, and then I explained the moving of where you voted, your voting locations, and everybody wants to put it together when they're actually separate. So, can you explain gerrymandering?
Well, let me give you the example of gerrymandering. When you're in power, you realize that your votes are not the dominant votes, but you can become the dominant party by drawing a line in such a strange and unusual way as to enhance your voting strength and to dilute the voting strength of the other groups who may be opposed to your group, so that your group, which may be a minority in terms of voting strength, ends up having the voting power to run things. So you can do it like they've done in Texas in reference to race, where you decide we want to limit blacks and Latinos. So what the state authorities have continued to do is to try to pack so many into one district or to split them so they don't have power. That's one of the things they did in Killeen. They split the city of Killeen in the middle, so that the strength of the minority vote could not prevail. And so that's kind of what the gerrymander is. It's like redlining with an insurance company.
Right.
Let's look at this map, and let me give you the example. In Texas, the Anglo vote is 45%. So 55% of the adult voting age population is minority. And even with the citizenship number, it's right at half and half. And so, but you look at the congressional districts, the Anglo vote controls 2/3 of the congressional districts, whereas the minority vote has influence in only 1/3. And so that comes for, like in Dallas, Fort Worth, what they did, instead of creating districts within the counties, they created, they take little slivers of parts of Dallas County so that you can limit the impact of the minorities that are in the county, because Dallas has become a minority-dominant county in terms of countywide elections. But they take a little sliver, and they run group up, one district up towards the border with Oklahoma, drop a couple of districts out into East Texas, and they pull up all these voters that are much more conservative, but they prevent the Dallas voters from being able to vote for the person who will prevail in an election in that district. So you take out little slivers and join them with hostile voters. And so that's what they did in that area, or like they did with Congresswoman Johnson, where they did one county that's pretty much wholly contained. They took everybody that seemed to be black or brown and just threw them into that district. So they added folks that was already an effective district so that black and brown folks wouldn't have impact in other districts. And so when we did a display for the court during the redistricting trial, you can color shade the maps, and you can shade the maps that show that all precincts that are 80% or more black and brown dominant. And with hers, there was one little white speck in the very middle of the district that was not. But every other district was shaded because they just threw everyone in. And so they added all these folks, and there was no reason for them to be added in. And so we won that case in front of three judge panel, 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat. We had won it in D.C. as well before the Shelby County decision by the Supreme Court caused our decision to be abdicated. But when you get judges who are sincere and they look at it, they can see the gerrymandering that takes place, and it's really diluted the power of the minority vote. Dr. Richard Murray, who testified for us during the redistricting trial, talked about that number and how there should be at least 16 to 17 seats that minorities have influence in Texas, and yet you reduce the number in their first map to 10, and in the latest map to 11 or 12.
So that's like here in Killeen, or we'll say Central Texas because we are, when they they do the map, they put Killeen has more in common with Lampasas than they do with Belton, because certain people will keep their seats if it stays. Killeen has more with Lampasas than they do with Belton. Someone will be allowed to keep their seat. And if they agree with us and say, we know we have more in common with Belton, that one person we have now won't be able to keep his seat as a legislator.
Well, and your testimony on that was really crucial in our case. You were able to talk about some of the pastimes and things there, like excuse my language, but the Hope Fest that we have down in Lampasas. And I think that was truly significant. But they did that for a reason, because they looked at the map and they realized the only way to keep it a white dominant district is to drop down to Lampasas and to split Killeen.
Yeah. So that's something we have to pay attention to also, correct?
Oh, there's no question. Because we were able to show the court, and that's one of the issues we won on. The Supreme Court granted cert in those cases yesterday, so we don't know if our victory is going to be upheld or not. We have to feel good about it, but we'll see, since we did win in front of a bipartisan group of judges and had won so many other times in front of bipartisan groups of judges. But the fact of the matter is, we're going to be having the Supreme Court decide if Killeen gets that new House district that we won in HD 54, that would put Killeen back together, where you've had real strong common voting patterns in the minority communities in that city. And so the minority communities in that city just should be able to be empowered the way that that white communities who dominate votes in other cities are empowered. So it was clear discrimination against Killeen in the way that the map was drawn, and your testimony was crucial in that, and being able to have the court to see the kinds of things that continue to happen in Killeen. I don't know if you recall this, but in the first round trial before we were reversed, you talked about the thing in the voting site, and an African American woman was denied the right to vote when a white female was allowed to vote. That had the same issue almost at the same point in time. And the other things about like how one of the police groups there was stationed outside a voting site
in Temple
that minorities went to, and they were harassing all the black voters when they came out, trying to find out who they voted for and all that, and how intimidating it was to the voters. So we still need that kind of evidence and testimony, because we still have to show there's polarized voting in the community in order to prevail.
That's true. That's true. And the changing of the polls, can they just change it automatically? Does it have to be voted on? Does anybody have to see it before they decide that this location is no longer going to happen? It's going to be combined with this one over here, and that's how it's going to be. Is that done correctly?
Well, that's the problem with not having a Section 5. That's the consequence of the Shelby County decision.
Right.
The terrible decision by the Supreme Court that basically eliminated Section 5 from our record. Section 5 required a jurisdiction that was covered by that portion of the Voting Rights Act to submit all such changes to the Department of Justice, and they would go through an analysis to see if it had a negative impact on the minority vote. And so when you had changes like in precinct sites that would be inconvenient or what have you to minorities, those things had to be pre-cleared. In Texas was one of the worst jurisdictions in the nation, if not the worst. And we had many such proposed changes that were denied by DOJ. Now, since we don't have a Section 5 and DOJ is no longer enabled to be a screener, the only thing you have to do is have the local officials who are responsible for that make the decision, and then it's upon us or groups like us to bring lawsuits to try to get judges to enforce the law under Section 2 and say this is going to have a discriminatory impact and try to get a federal judge to enjoin, but it takes a lawsuit. And so it makes it really difficult because I think people were waiting for the Shelby County decision. And so all around the state, they started to move voting sites so that they would undermine minority voting strength. And that happened all around where folks wanted to limit black and brown voting strength. You know, we had calls this week in reference to that. I guess, what was it, up in Robertson County?
Yeah, Robertson County.
Yeah, where they had the issue of taking all the sites that were convenient to minorities and moving them out to areas where minorities felt were really unfriendly to them. And they were not only unfriendly, but they were inconvenient to a population that's already strapped for reasonable transportation because they don't have public transportation, and many people there don't have the ways or means to go distances to go to the polls.
Okay, I'm going to ask you another question because it's something I had to do. And since you're newly elected again, so congratulations. But
thank you.
It's of something that we have to change. And I'll say we as I mean the state has to trickle it down. I hear a lot of people, I do radio. So I hear a lot of people say, NAACP is not necessary because they're not doing anything. Well, first I would, I would turn around and say, yes, we are. We're doing this, this, and this. And, they would look at me like you don't count because you know what's going on because you're there. But how do we find out, as they say, people on the streets, how do they read a paper? How can they find out what we're doing? Because people want to know what we're doing. And also, they say we weren't needed during this election time because we're not doing anything. So what I did was instead of opening my mouth, I stood back and just not forgot about NAACP, but I took it out of my head that I was part of the state NAACP, right? Took it out of my head and realized I needed to understand why so many people were saying what they were saying. And I did. So for almost a week, I knew what should have been out on the street and be heard. I knew what needed to be said, but I heard nothing. I heard absolutely nothing. So then now I can't tell them, you should know this because we're doing it. I can't say that anymore because I stepped back to be the person who's questioning and realized I wouldn't know. So this year, since this is two things at one time, you are newly again elected president for the state. How are we going to devise a way, or I'll say we need to devise a way to me that everybody gets to understand that your local area might not be doing anything and it's not our fault or it's not, your fault, but the state is doing something to implement something. So we need to come up with a way to get around that part and get down to the people.
Well, the first thing I'll say is I think that's a cop-out when people say that. I think that people generally are probably not even members when they say that. And if you're really a committed person and you don't think things are being done, you join an organization to try to make sure that it does the kind of things that it's supposed to do or that it should do. And so I think that's the biggest problem with that. That goes to the nature of the person who's making that. And I hate to say that. I'm not trying to be defensive in that. Number two is the NAACP is a volunteer organization. And you're not going to get the newsletter if you're not a member, number one. Number two, it's not a cookie-cutter approach. And so, for example, there were things, let's say, for example, when Rick Perry was governor, I haven't had any success like that with Greg Abbott, but, there are things that Rick Perry did that may have undermined him with his base, so I didn't champion or hold a news conference about we saved this guy's life or anything like that. So some things you don't do, but you accomplish it because you do the things that you're supposed to. You go meet with people, you go talk with people, and I think you know how successful we've been in a very difficult situation at the legislature.
Yeah.
But we don't, but anybody who's been to our meetings and seen the reports understand the kinds of things we were involved in and the successes that we've had. But those on the outside, you're not a member, and that's kind of your thing. That's your deficiency in not being involved. And I think you know all the individual things that we do to help folks keep their jobs, and all the incredible things you do in school districts to help students stay in or prevent districts from taking actions against individuals, just advising people on what their rights are and putting them in contact with the right people. There's so much that we do. You just start looking at it. You got people in the prison system, and Dr. Watkins does a great job.
Yeah, he does.
We send those cases and things over to Dr. Watkins. We don't hold a news conference. We don't say that, we got them to reassign this, or we got them to conduct an investigation into this person who offended or used excessive force. We don't say that, but it gets done. And we don't have success on everything we do. I'm not going to lie about that. We probably have many instances where we don't have any success because we have a hostile state in many ways, but we have great successes and they're doing great things. And if anyone goes to a state meeting and listens to the branches talk about the things they've been able to do, it's enormous. For example, the San Antonio branch, I get a lawyer that calls me and he has some issues. And I said, well, this is a local issue. So I said, email me and the local president.
Right.
The local president got involved, and the black officer who was being fired, he wasn't ever done right because they wanted to avoid some other issues. So they gave him 1 day off, and which he did. He deserved a commendation for what happened and not any kind of discipline. But at least we saved his job.
Right.
And it was going to be up to him to go file a lawsuit or something on the 1 day discipline, but the San Antonio branch came through. It wasn't in the newspaper. People don't know what happened,
right,
but it was done.
That's true.